Yeah, let's talk a bit more about closed-loop food systems, renewable energy for a moment, because I'm fascinated by this with the work you do, the research you do. There's so many breakthroughs and technologies happening, and I'm interested to hear, is there any that you've come across that you get particularly excited about? Right. So I watched a recent, there was a documentary on the state of our oceans, and there's a guy, I think it was Thailand. He's come up with a way that he can make these packaging in countries that have got these sachets for everything, where they can maybe do these sachets out of seaweed.
Oh, fantastic.
Right. Yeah. Now, and I look at that because I go, wow, that's exciting, right? Because it's tackling a real massive problem. It's doing it in a
plastic waste,
way.
exactly.
But I'm just curious. I mean, you might see more of this. So I'm just wondering, any technologies or breakthroughs or things you get super excited about that you see kind of emerging and happening out there?
I get really excited about circular economy. And so this is about not just about how can we create and add value, but how can we continually maintain value. So this is about keeping things in a loop. So you talked about closed loop food systems, but this is not just about food. Circular economies are about other materials as well, and even service potential as well. So if we think about things from food, there's something called the food recovery hierarchy. And that's where when food is wasted, ideally you try and still get whatever excess is still consumable to people that need to eat. So to our hungry, those who are going without meals. And that's where organizations like Oz Harvest, Food Bank, Fair Share, Second Bite, etc., all come into play and can rescue that food rescue, and take it to charities that feed hungry people. So you've got this way that food is not gone to landfill, it's actually gone somewhere and adds value elsewhere. And that's really important. And we see this can occur as well, like say bananas on the farms. If we look further back in the food chain to production and growth of the food that we eat, about 30% of bananas never leave the farm. That's a lot.
That's a lot of bananas, right?
That's a lot of bananas. And that's mostly because wrong shape, wrong color, wrong size, that they don't meet supermarket specs.
Yes.
So, if it doesn't look like the banana we expect in the supermarket to look like, it's really hard for the farmer to sell it. Yeah. So what they used to have to do is plow it into the ground. And yes, okay, that might add some nutrients back into the soil, but look at all the money that's gone into growing that food, all the energy, the water that's gone into that. I mean, it's just insane. So what we've seen is the evolution of new markets for these materials that would otherwise disappear into waste. And so, for example, those bananas could be turned, especially if they're still greenish, into banana flour. So when we've got a community now where we know there's people who do have gluten sensitivities, imagine if you could make some of your baked goods with a banana flour instead. Banana cake made straight out with bananas and bananas at both levels. So we see this happening across the globe now, and this is called waste valorisation. And it's something that is a big focus with the Australian government. We've got something in Australia called the National Food Waste Strategy, where as a country, we're trying to halve our food waste, halve it by 2030. So we've got less than 10 years to do this. Yeah. And that's because we've committed to one of the Sustainable Development Goals to knock food waste in half. But a big part of that, if we can think about where our waste occurs the most, yes, households, and that's can be tricky to get every single household to trim their waste a bit. But where can you do it in bulk? At the farm gate. So if we can come up with ways to add value to those farmers, to valorize that waste, I think that's pretty exciting stuff.
I think you're right. You know what? There's an education there, because you're right. Farmers markets, you seal the veg there, and it's not the same shape, slightly battered, bruised, the marks, all of which is normal. So when you've got equal size veg and fruit that's the perfect color, you've actually got a problem, because that's often where it's forced or done a certain way as well, right?
Absolutely.
So I think there's an education that happens there. And you mentioned Oz Harvest. That's Roni, isn't it? I think that's Roni Khan.
Yeah, Roni Khan, absolutely.
I love the work she's doing.
Amazing
I met her years ago. I was speaking at an event, and she was on the gig. A friend of mine actually is a fine dining French chef who was trained in Joel Robuchon's restaurants, who was the chef of the century with 33 Michelin stars. He's doing a process right now where he's got this project from plant to plate, trying to encourage what people can actually simply grow and do themselves even.
Yes,
and
great.
Make simple recipes and stuff. So, it's great to see initiatives like that. But let's talk to some of the stats, because getting ready for this conversation, I know you're probably across this. I want to bounce off some of these stats. And they've come from government bodies, also the SDG, which we'll talk about. 1/3 of all produced food is lost or wasted annually. In Australia, 1.3 billion tons globally. Sorry, that's globally. 1.3 billion tons globally at a cost to the economy, the global economy, of about $940 billion a year.
And we can't fathom those sorts of figures, can we?
Wow.
And even at the local level, what does that mean? What does that mean in our households? What does that mean for Australia? I mean, we can see what we buy in when we shop. And so it's easiest to try and think of things like, what does that mean for me? Like even to think that every individual Australian wastes the equivalent of nearly 300 kilograms worth of food a year. If we add up all of the different ways that food can be wasted from the farm gate to our plate. And that's, I mean, I don't know, I'm polite enough not to ask how much you might personally weigh, Mark. But I know that for me, that's like...
I'm brave, I'll share. So actually, it's funny, I was at the doctor's yesterday, funnily enough. So I'm actually over right now. And I went vegetarian in this lockdown. Actually prior. February, I became pescatarian's truer. No drinking alcohol, pescatarian, and I've actually been more conscious, I have to say, about things like my food waste in this time. And bizarrely, my weight's actually gone up. I've gone up. I'm normally 88, 87, 88 kilos.
Perhaps it's muscle. You've put on a bit of extra muscle because you're doing lots of isometric holds and yeah.
I don't want to break your flow though, but I'll tell you, I'm 91 kilos.
I was just thinking, I mean, with my weight, and think about that 300 kilograms of food that's wasted each year by every Australian. That's like 4 or 5 times me that I throw away every year. That's me every few months. I'm throwing one of me away. That's insane to think about. It's like throwing away, 1 in every 4 or 5 shopping bags of food. Like go to, at the moment, we can now go out twice a day in Melbourne. That's pretty exciting during COVID. So you might be able to still get to the shops maybe once or twice. But we can bring back, imagine if you just popped one of those bags in the bin the second you hopped out of the stores. You'd never do that.
No, exactly.
That's what we do. It's crazy.
I think that this is how we work, right? I love how you're breaking it down because we see the world in pictures. And now, it used to be 5 of me I'd be thrown away. Now it would be 4 because of my weight gain, right? So it's less than it. So maybe if I keep eating, then I'm throwing none of me away, right?
That's right. Well, the whole concept of, the food that's wasted, we're talking about that 1/3 of all food is thrown away. That's food grown for human consumption. Yes. So, and in Australia, we grow enough food to feed nearly 2-3 times our population. Obviously, much of it goes to export traditionally, but we still have like between 8 to 12% of our population will go without a meal at some stage because they can't afford it. So this is where, once again, the Oz Harvests and
the Oz Harvests, the work they do
play such a critical role.
Yeah, it's amazing. But I think the way you've broken that down, like just literally look at your it makes me think when I used to take tours, I used to say to people, because they're always late, they didn't value their time. That's only 5 minutes. Well, I'll tell you what, you can all agree now that you're going to be 5 minutes late every day. Let's just take a city off the itinerary. Which one shall we not bother going to visit? It's the same thing. It's the same thing, right? That's what you're doing. So I love that. Like, start thinking, everybody, about throwing yourself away, or or breaking down. Every time you go shopping, you're throwing one shopping bag away. No, you're not going to do that. So
imagine. I've done the calculations, and I've worked out that if our households in Australia, if we could halve our food waste just in our house, I know we're trying to do this for the Sustainable Development Goals and under the food waste strategy and all of that, but if you and I and everyone else that's going to watch this decided, okay, we're going to knock our food waste in half, the amount of greenhouse gases that we can save, because when food waste goes to landfill, it gets covered over and air doesn't get in, and so it actually produces methane. Yes. It's a greenhouse gas that's 21 times stronger than CO2. Whereas if food waste goes to compost, it gets aerated and so forth, and you don't have that same problem. So they're 2 totally different ways of putting food into the soil. But if we can cut the amount we're throwing into landfill or compost by half, the greenhouse gases, that's like taking 2 coal-fired power stations offline for a whole year.
Wow.
That's phenomenal. Imagine that, just by buying a little less veg and only what you need, and making sure you eat the crusts and not throw them away.
100%. And it's interesting because Australia is ranked as the 4th highest food wasting country globally. So this is actually something that we, in Australia, and I didn't look at the whole list, but it strikes me as being, rightly or wrongly, it seems to be those Western countries that are the biggest offenders for this, right?
Yeah, and we see it, sadly we see it because we're more affluent. So the more affluent countries generally waste more food.
There's a definite correlation between affluence and waste for sure.
Definitely.
Interesting you said there, because a lot of this, almost half of all fruit and veg is wasted, which shows that it is those sorts of things that we buy that we just kind of buy and chuck out. We could just put a bit more thought into it. So 3.7 trillion, the equivalent of 3.7 trillion apples.
Isn't that nuts?
Imagine, and if they're going into the ocean, that's like the biggest apple dunk on the planet, isn't it then? That would be like, oh my word. The numbers here are savage.